September 1940, over the skies of London, the city burns, but refuses to fall. The sound of distant explosions echoes through the foggy twilight as air raid sirens wail their eerie warning to civilians below. A wave of German bombers roars overhead, their ominous shadows sweeping across the streets. The heavy drone of Luftwaffe engines is met by the shrill whine of Spitfires, desperately rising into the sky to intercept them. This is the Battle of Britain, a fight for survival. In the heart of the capital, civilians huddle in bomb shelters, their lives hanging in the balance, while pilots above engage in a deadly aerial ballet. The stakes are clear. If the Luftwaffe succeeds, Britain will fall. But as the relentless attacks continue, a flicker of hope rises from the ruins. For the men of the Royal Air Force, the fate of the nation rests in their hands. Against overwhelming odds, they are Britain's last line of defense, determined to defy the enemy and protect the skies. It is a battle that will come to define not just the war, but the very spirit of the British people. The storm clouds of war gathered over Europe long before the first shots were fired. In the years leading up to World War II, Adolf Hitler's Nazi regime embarked on a campaign of expansion with the goal of reasserting Germany's dominance across the continent. In 1938, the annexation of Austria, an event known as the Anschluss, was a precursor to even bolder plans. With the world watching, Hitler then turned his gaze toward Czechoslovakia, demanding the Sudetenland, a region of the country with a significant ethnic German population. For Britain, the response was one of cautious diplomacy. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, believing that peace could still be preserved, adopted a policy of appeasement, seeking to avoid a war with Nazi Germany at all costs. His famous declaration of peace for our time, after the Munich Agreement of 1938, would prove tragically naive. Within a year, on the 1st of September 1939, Germany invaded Poland. Britain and France had little choice but to declare war, standing as the last major powers in Europe still committed to opposing Hitler's expansion. From the outset, Britain faced immense challenges. Its military forces were ill-prepared for the scale of war that quickly engulfed Europe. At the same time, the Royal Air Force, RAF, was still in the midst of modernization. While Britain's army was mostly deployed on the European continent, the RAF stood as the nation's first line of defense against the growing threat of the Luftwaffe. Yet in those early days, no one could have foreseen how crucial the skies over Britain would become in the fight for survival. By the summer of 1940, the world was stunned by the rapid success of Nazi forces in Europe. France, once seen as a major military power, was swiftly overrun, and by June, the Germans had occupied Paris. For Britain, the fall of France was a devastating blow. The British Expeditionary Force had been forced to retreat from Dunkirk in late May, leaving behind heavy equipment and morale shattered. Winston Churchill, newly appointed Prime Minister in May, understood the peril that now faced the British Isles, but it was his indomitable will and the resolve of the British people that would prevent the country from surrendering. On the 4th of June, Churchill made his famous speech, declaring, "We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall never surrender." Britain was alone, but it was not defeated. The Battle of Britain, which had already begun in earnest in July, would prove to be the critical turning point in the war. By then, the Luftwaffe had begun a series of bombing raids aimed at weakening Britain's resolve. The Luftwaffe's primary mission was to destroy the RAF, thereby clearing the way for Operation Sea Lion, the planned German invasion of Britain. But Britain's air defense system, while overstretched, had one advantage: Radar. The Royal Air Force's use of radar for early warning of incoming aircraft was a technological marvel that allowed British pilots to react quickly and effectively. However, the sheer scale of the Luftwaffe's attacks threatened to overwhelm the RAF, with British pilots facing not only superior numbers but also the deadly skills of the Luftwaffe pilots. Throughout the summer of 1940, the skies were filled with dogfights between British Spitfires and Hurricanes and German Messerschmitts and Junkers bombers. The odds seemed insurmountable, but the British spirit remained unbroken. However, by the end of August 1940, the situation was critical. The Luftwaffe, though unable to decisively break the RAF, had wreaked havoc on British cities. London, Coventry, and other industrial cities were bombarded night after night, and the civilian death toll began to mount. Yet, amidst the bombing raids and chaos, the RAF continued to hold firm. Though outnumbered and exhausted, British pilots displayed an incredible tenacity, a dogged determination to protect their homeland. It was in these dark days that the foundation for Britain's survival was laid. The Battle of Britain would not only become a defining moment for the RAF, but would alter the course of the war, showing the world that Nazi Germany could be stopped. The Battle of Britain raged through the summer and into the autumn of 1940, a desperate contest between the RAF and the Luftwaffe for control of the skies above Britain. Yet, it was not just the military machines that would determine the outcome of this battle. It was also a war of endurance and willpower. The British people, living under the constant threat of bombing raids, had to remain steadfast in their resolve, knowing that their very survival depended on the courage of a few hundred men in the sky. In the war room, British leadership knew that a German invasion was imminent unless the Luftwaffe could be defeated. Adolf Hitler had already made plans for Operation Sea Lion, the German invasion of Britain, and the air superiority of the Luftwaffe was seen as a prerequisite for this operation's success. The stakes were therefore astronomical. If the Luftwaffe could break the British air defences, the way would be clear for a full-scale invasion. But if the RAF held their ground, it would mark the first major setback for Hitler's ambitions, and the possibility of British victory, though distant, would remain alive. At the same time, Britain's political leadership, particularly Winston Churchill, understood the importance of holding firm. For him, the fight for Britain was not just about military survival, but about standing as a beacon for the free world. He knew that a defeat would be catastrophic, not just for Britain, but for democracy itself. The RAF's primary mission was to defend Britain's skies and prevent the Luftwaffe from achieving air superiority. But the British forces were severely outnumbered. The Luftwaffe had at least 2,500 aircraft at its disposal, compared to the RAF's 600 fighters. The Germans also had the advantage of better trained pilots and more advanced bombers. Yet, the RAF pilots, many of whom were young and relatively inexperienced, were determined to hold the line. The iconic Spitfires and Hurricanes, designed and built by the British, became the symbols of defiance in the skies, while radar technology, developed at great cost, allowed the RAF to detect enemy aircraft long before they could be seen. As the battle wore on, Britain's strategic position became increasingly precarious. Luftwaffe bombers, initially targeting RAF airfields and radar stations, began to shift their focus to civilian targets, notably London. The Blitz began in earnest, a terrifying display of German military power aimed at breaking the morale of the British people. London was bombed night after night, its people forced to shelter underground in the dark, hoping to survive the next wave of terror. Yet, in these darkest moments, Churchill's call for resolve resonated deeply across the nation. In the face of these dire circumstances, the RAF pilots, often flying multiple sorties a day, continued to wage a fierce battle in the skies. Their courage, combined with the technology of radar and the strategic brilliance of their commanders, ensured that Britain's defences remained intact. This period of uncertainty, fraught with fear and unimaginable loss, would ultimately determine the course of the war. It was a test of endurance, and Britain would soon find that the battle in the skies would be won not by sheer numbers, but by resilience, innovation, and the will to never surrender. The Blitz was a test of human endurance unlike any other. In the dead of night, air raid sirens would sound, signaling that the enemy was near. For the people of London and other cities, this was an unrelenting, constant reminder of their vulnerability. Bombs would fall in thunderous waves, shaking the very foundations of the city as entire neighborhoods were reduced to rubble. Yet, even in the darkest moments, a quiet defiance filled the air. Families huddled in the safety of underground shelters, waiting for the all-clear signal. But their hearts never lost hope. Life in the capital was punctuated by this rhythm of survival, and the spirit of the British people became a cornerstone of their victory. In the face of death, they refused to bend. Every morning after the bombing, the streets would be filled with those who survived, continuing their work, rebuilding, and carrying on. The people knew they had no choice but to endure. They understood that the fate of the nation lay in their collective strength, not only in the hands of the military. In these years of hardship, the everyday lives of civilians became an integral part of the war effort. The bombs that fell on London were as much a test of British resolve as the aerial dogfights fought overhead. Amid the devastation of the Blitz, one thing remained clear. Britain's survival would depend on the ability of the Royal Air Force to defend the skies. The Luftwaffe had a clear mission: destroy the RAF, break Britain's will, and pave the way for invasion. Yet, despite overwhelming numbers, the Luftwaffe would face unexpected resistance. The RAF's strategic brilliance lay not just in the skill of its pilots, but in the effective coordination of resources. Commanders like Sir Hugh Dowding, who headed Fighter Command, understood that Britain's survival hinged on precise tactics and coordination. Dowding's use of radar technology gave the RAF an edge, providing them with an early warning system to track the movements of incoming German bombers. This allowed British pilots to engage their enemies at the right time and place, and with carefully orchestrated attacks, they managed to take down wave after wave of Luftwaffe aircraft. The strength of the RAF also lay in the unique advantage provided by their aircraft, the Spitfire and the Hurricane. These nimble fighters, faster and more maneuverable than the German Messerschmitts, allowed British pilots to turn the tide of the aerial conflict. The combination of technology, tactics, and determination was critical in Britain's defense. Amidst the ferocity of battle, Britain's technological innovation played a pivotal role in the outcome of the conflict. Chief among these innovations was radar, which revolutionized the way Britain's defenses operated. Prior to radar, detecting incoming aircraft was a nearly impossible task, but the British, with the help of brilliant minds at places like the Telecommunications Research Establishment in Malvern, had developed a system that could track enemy planes as they approached Britain's shores. This gave the RAF crucial minutes to scramble fighter aircraft and direct them to intercept the Luftwaffe bombers, a significant advantage in a battle that was fought in real time. Equally important to Britain's aerial defense were the iconic aircraft that would forever be associated with the Battle of Britain, the Spitfire and the Hurricane. The Spitfire, a beautiful, agile fighter, was ideally suited to the fast-moving aerial combat that would come to define the battle. It was fast, responsive, and capable of matching the Luftwaffe's Messerschmitt Bf 109. Alongside it, the Hawker Hurricane, less glamorous but equally deadly, formed the backbone of the RAF's offensive capabilities. Together, these aircraft allowed the RAF to punch far above its weight and inflict heavy losses on the German forces. In the end, it was these technological breakthroughs, combined with human ingenuity, that provided Britain with the tools necessary to resist the overwhelming might of Nazi Germany. During the darkest days of the war, the British people were guided by a leader whose resolve became synonymous with Britain's own resistance. Winston Churchill, whose speeches inspired millions, was unwavering in his determination to see Britain through to victory. From his first days as Prime Minister, Churchill understood that the survival of Britain depended not just on military success, but on the spirit of its people. His speeches were an essential part of his strategy, galvanizing the nation to stand firm. His address on the 20th of August 1940, after the Luftwaffe launched its most intense bombing raids on London, captured the essence of his leadership. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. These words, aimed at the RAF pilots, became an iconic representation of the British war effort, but also of Churchill's ability to inspire action and resolve in the face of the unimaginable. Churchill's leadership extended beyond speeches. It was his unrelenting focus on victory, even when defeat seemed imminent, that set him apart. He never once considered surrender, and his resolve encouraged not only the British people, but also the global allies who would soon rally around Britain's struggle. His leadership was as essential to the success of the Battle of Britain as the pilots in the sky or the technology that guided them. The Battle of Britain reached its most intense phase in late August 1940. The Luftwaffe, having initially focused on Britain's airfields and radar stations, now shifted its strategy to attacking the heart of the country. The Germans believed that by bombing the civilian population, they would break the morale of the British people and force the government to seek peace. But in doing so, they underestimated the unbreakable resolve of the British. The attack on London on the night of the 7th of September 1940 marked a critical moment. The Luftwaffe launched their first sustained bombing campaign, dropping thousands of tons of explosives on the city. Over the following nights, London would endure relentless bombardment. Buildings were destroyed, fires raged, and the civilian death toll climbed, but the spirit of Londoners remained unshaken. People continued to work, to rebuild, and to carry on. They had been flying day after day, intercepting wave after wave of German bombers. The attrition on both sides was severe, but it was clear that the Luftwaffe's efforts were not achieving the decisive victory they had anticipated. Though the Germans were inflicting significant damage, the RAF continued to fight on, the sound of Spitfires and Hurricanes filling the air in defiance. By the end of September, the Luftwaffe had failed to break Britain's defenses. The RAF, despite being outnumbered, had shown remarkable resilience and tactical superiority. The Germans were forced to abandon their campaign to destroy the RAF, a critical failure that would have significant implications for the rest of the war. In fact, this marked the first major defeat for Nazi Germany. For the British people, this was not only a military victory, it was a victory of will. The sky was no longer solely dominated by the German Luftwaffe, but by the courage and ingenuity of the British defenders. This moment would go down in history as a turning point, not just in the Battle of Britain, but in the entire war. While Britain's victory in the Battle of Britain was a monumental achievement, its full impact was not immediately apparent to all. One of the most striking responses came from the Soviet Union. At the time, Joseph Stalin believed that Britain was on the verge of collapse. The Germans had already crushed France, and their forces were pushing hard against Britain, with bombings every night and the looming threat of invasion. To the Soviet leadership, it seemed as though Britain would soon be forced to negotiate with Hitler, or worse, surrender. However, the failure of the Luftwaffe to break the RAF's resistance, combined with the endurance of the British people, in late September, as the Luftwaffe was forced to shift tactics and scale back their operations, the RAF's triumph in the skies was undeniable. The Soviets, who had their own plans in the making, were forced to reconsider their assumptions about Britain's capacity to resist. In fact, they began to understand that Britain's continued fight, especially with its air superiority intact, could eventually tip the balance of the war in favor of the Allies. The turning point in Britain's skies was a catalyst for the broader war effort. The RAF's victory not only solidified British resistance, but had a profound psychological effect on both the Allies and the Axis powers. The idea that Nazi Germany could be defeated, that Britain could stand firm against the might of the Luftwaffe, inspired the world. It was a victory that proved the unthinkable, that Britain, though standing alone, could hold its ground and continue to fight for freedom and democracy. Momentum would have far-reaching consequences. As the RAF continued to disrupt German air operations, it became increasingly clear to the Axis powers that Britain was not finished. It was only just beginning to take the fight to the enemy. The RAF, along with the support of Britain's civilian population, had made an indelible mark on the course of history. The tide had truly begun to turn. The outcome of the Battle of Britain marked not only a strategic victory for Britain, but a momentous shift in the course of the war. The Luftwaffe's failure to achieve air superiority over Britain had grave consequences for Nazi Germany. Their attempts to break the RAF and force Britain into submission had been decisively thwarted, signaling the first major defeat for Hitler's forces. More importantly, it denied Germany the ability to carry out Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of Britain, which would have changed the entire trajectory of the war. For Britain, the victory in the skies was both a military and psychological triumph. The RAF, though severely depleted, had demonstrated the resilience and skill necessary to confront a more powerful enemy. The Luftwaffe, despite its technological superiority, was unable to break the British defense, and the myth of Nazi invincibility was shattered. The victory was a beacon of hope, not only for Britain, but for all the nations resisting the Axis powers. The determination and courage displayed by the RAF pilots became symbolic of the wider British resolve, one that would continue to inspire the Allied forces in the years to come. Globally, Britain's victory also had a profound impact on the Soviet Union's perception of the war. Stalin, initially skeptical of Britain's ability to withstand the Nazi onslaught, now realized that Britain was a formidable force, capable of holding its ground in the face of overwhelming odds. This shifted Soviet priorities and fostered a stronger bond between Britain and the USSR. Their ideological differences, the British victory in the skies, served as a symbol of defiance, and soon, other Allied powers would join forces with Britain in a united front against the Axis. The RAF's success was also a reminder of the vital importance of air power in modern warfare. It proved that air superiority was not only a key to victory, but also a means of denying the enemy the ability to wage war effectively. The Battle of Britain's immediate aftermath gave Britain the breathing space it desperately needed. For the first time since the war's beginning, Britain could hold its head high, knowing that it had delivered a powerful blow to the heart of Nazi Germany's ambitions. Though the Luftwaffe had inflicted damage, Britain had survived, and in doing so, had preserved its place in the war. More than just a military victory, it was a victory of morale. The British population had shown that they would not buckle under pressure, that they would fight on, no matter the cost. The long-term consequences of the battle were profound. The Luftwaffe, their momentum halted, would never again pose a serious threat to Britain. The skies would remain under British control for the rest of the war, enabling the RAF to carry out crucial air campaigns, including the strategic bombing raids against German infrastructure and the eventual D-Day landings. Britain's air superiority was a crucial factor in the eventual defeat of Nazi Germany, enabling Allied forces to stage successful operations across Europe and North Africa. The victory in the Battle of Britain also reshaped the psychology of both the Allies and the Axis. For the Germans, it was a crushing blow to their reputation and their strategy. The myth of their air superiority had been exposed as a fallacy. For the Allies, the victory proved that the Axis could be defeated, that the war was not yet lost. The British public's indomitable spirit had played a significant role in the battle, and their perseverance continued to serve as a moral foundation for the war effort. Churchill's leadership, as a key figure in this success, cemented his place in history as the unwavering leader who guided Britain through its darkest hours. His defiance and determination were mirrored in the courage of his people, and together they proved that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, survival and victory were possible. In the wake of the Battle of Britain, a new chapter in the war unfolded. Although Britain had emerged victorious, it was clear that the conflict was far from over. The German threat had not disappeared. It had merely been delayed. Yet, this victory, one of survival against all odds, proved that Britain could withstand the might of Nazi Germany. It was a victory that revitalized the Allied cause and solidified Britain's role as a central pillar of the resistance against Hitler's forces. The battle's outcome, however, went beyond just military tactics. With the Luftwaffe's failure to cripple the RAF, Britain now turned its attention to launching counterattacks, using air superiority to hit German targets. In the coming years, the Royal Air Force would play a crucial role in strategic bombing campaigns across Europe, targeting Nazi infrastructure, factories, and cities, ultimately weakening Germany's war machine. Beyond the skies, the Battle of Britain served as a rallying point for the growing strength of the Allied coalition. The resolve shown by the British people, from Churchill's speeches to the bravery of the civilian population enduring the Blitz, became a symbol for all nations fighting Nazi aggression. The United States, though still neutral at the time, began to shift its focus towards supporting Britain. December 1941. Churchill, now more than ever, stood as the embodiment of Britain's indomitable spirit. His famous address, "We Shall Never Surrender," encapsulated the profound sense of purpose that gripped Britain during those months. In the years that followed, the country would face even greater challenges. Yet, the morale boost from the Battle of Britain proved crucial. The victory was not just about the survival of Britain, but the survival of democracy itself in the face of fascist totalitarianism. As Britain turned its gaze toward eventual victory, the Battle of Britain remained a defining moment. It was a moment when the British people and their military forces proved that against the greatest of odds, they could stand tall and fight for their future. The battle had given Britain not only a military advantage, but the moral high ground, the knowledge that they had faced down the world's most formidable military power and won. And this, in turn, would shape the final phases of the war. The Battle of Britain stands as one of the most significant moments in modern history, a testament not only to the courage and resilience of the British people, but also to the power of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming adversity. For Britain, it was more than just a military victory. It was a reaffirmation of what was at stake in the war, the preservation of freedom, democracy, and a way of life threatened by Nazi tyranny. As the Luftwaffe withdrew and the skies cleared, Britain had not only defended its island, but had also delivered a message to the world. Tyranny could be resisted, and the fight against fascism would continue. It was a moment that inspired countless nations, including the Soviet Union and the United States, to redouble their efforts in the war against Hitler's regime. British people, though battered and bruised, had shown that they would never surrender, no matter the cost. In the years that followed, the victory in the skies over Britain would shape not just military strategy, but the world's understanding of what was possible in war. The lessons of the Battle of Britain, resilience, tactical brilliance, and the importance of unity would resonate through the remainder of the conflict, and the ultimate victory over Nazi Germany. For the British, it was a battle fought not just with weapons, but with heart, with hope, and with an unyielding belief that, against all odds, they could prevail. In the years to come, as the war neared its end, the story of the few who stood against the many would be remembered not only for its bravery, but for its profound reminder that even in the darkest of times, the light of courage can shine through.